Welcome to the second village board meeting for discussion of the budget for full year 2025-2026. We're here in the Village Hall boardroom. It's 6:08. Megan, would you take a roll call, please?
Trustee Wojtka?
Here.
Trustee Banoski?
Hello.
Trustee Mishler?
Here.
Trustee Briggs?
Here.
Mayor Domeratz?
Here. I'm going to wait for just a moment until Village Manager White gets back here. Just remember that if you're talking into your mic, to make sure you're close enough to it, and that if you're not using it, that you turn it off. Village Manager White, I'm turning things over to you. Where do you want to get started?
Well, thank you, Mayor. So obviously, we gave the budget presentation a few nights ago. From my perspective, there's not significant amendments incorporated in this budget that I think are going to be of substance, reducing this outside of significant allocations of fund balance, should the board choose to do that. I didn't know if the board, in their review, had an opportunity to find some areas they had some questions on, discuss it. I think going through this at a departmental level and looking at, hey, let's cut, ice cube trays over here and, less boots over there or something like that, it's not going to bear a lot of fruit. If we could have done that, we would have done that. But I want to make sure you have the opportunity to make sure you understand what's in here, what's important to you, what questions you may have, and kind of go through that process. And I'm not sure how you want to go about it, Mayor, one person at a time, or what have you. Just have a casual conversation about it.
Why don't we I can start down here at this end. Tracy, are you okay if I start with you? Or do you want me to go someplace else and come back?
Go someplace else.
All right. Emily, do you want me to start with you? Do you want me to go someplace else?
No, we can start.
Adam, are you? We'll give you a second to finish your sandwich bite. Are you okay if we start here?
Sure.
Okay. Do you have anything that you have questions about or that you'd like to discuss?
At the moment, it was just, clarifying some of the things, a few things I know we kind of touched base at one point. But just, sorry, excuse me, on like page 7, looking at some of the upfront stuff, because that explains, right, how we went through it, what all these numbers mean. And when the second paragraph there, right, that the adopted budget, or what the proposed budget here, you're seeing the 2.9 or 3.7%, and that really, the main difference there is just like, it's 2.9 higher than what we budgeted for last year. It's 3.7 for the revenue, 3.7 higher, but that's because our revenues this year are a little bit lower than we anticipated, so that's why there's just that difference there. Is that about right? And for me, it's more about shaping the picture. Here's where we are now, and here's how this budget compares to where we are.
That's what it's saying.
Right.
In a nutshell.
Okay. Outside of that, nothing really, just maybe a few little things with some of the diagrams, making sure that maybe we have little captions so that when other folks in the public are reading them, they understand some of the industry standard parlance, right? So for example, like on page 8, just a little clarification on what those parentheses mean and why. I think would just be helpful for folks who...
Denoting those are negative.
Exactly.
Versus an accounting term.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Since they're all the same color, whereas usually you might see them green versus red.
Yeah, that's all. Just little things that when people pick them up.
Okay.
So in to piggyback on what you said, Adam, in terms of revenue that we've had in past budget years, in the past we've had an appropriated fund balance. I guess we could speak to last year's budget, right? Last year's budget, we had an appropriated fund balance that we could carry over into the next year's budget of $201,651 that we do not have to appropriate to this 25-26 budget.
There is money in fund balance. We're just recommending not appropriating it this year, just due to where there's structured expenses that exceed our anticipated revenue. And by appropriating it this year, you're almost kicking the can down the road to saying, you're going to have the whole, that whatever you appropriate this year, you'll have that whole and the whole next year. And the reason we're doing that, because it's not going to be where we appropriate one time and then it goes away next year. And the reason we say that is because we're not carrying over anything that the board, it's been doing this, you see the trends, if you go back and look at your budgets for the last 3 or 4 years, instead of carrying over, say you authorize $10 million in expenses, well, that means you have $10 million in revenue because it's a balanced budget, right? And we only spent $9.7 million, right? So that means we had $300,000 that we didn't utilize, so we would let that fall to fund balance and then reappropriate next year should it be needed to balance the budget.
So
And
we
every
had-
year that carryover has been decreasing due to we keep just I guess, boiling this budget down, taking out all the extra or any of the discretionary spending or whatever projects don't materialize. At some point, you hit a saturation point where you can't keep doing that, and we finally saw that this year. So that's why we're saying that what's in here now is the bare bones. So they're structured expenses that are there and they're ongoing year after year, and they are exceeding your anticipated revenue. So there needs to be a tax increase in an effort to meet that gap, should you want to continue with the spending plan and the operational plan that's been set forth in here,
So,
right? There has to be a new foundation in which this budget lives.
and just to clarify, the appropriated fund balance that has sort of, if you will, has been left over, I don't know if that's the correct term, or unappropriated, is maybe the correct term, each year, you say, has decreased every year. But last year specifically, it was $201,000.
It's what the board
Okay.
appropriated to balance the
In-
budget in the current year we're in. That's correct.
In the years prior to last year, so, right, that maybe if we could go back a few years before that, was that, because you're saying it has decreased every year, like about how much was unappropriated? Just to give a sense of the decrease.
I mean, that's in your, so. What page is that? So appropriated fund balance, like in 21-22 was 250,000. Appropriated fund balance,
What page are you looking at? I'm just curious.
I'm sorry, page 24, your total budget overview.
Okay, just to kind of see the decrease that you're speaking of, right? Is that's what you're speaking about?
It's the appropriate fund balance, so it's whatever the budget gap was for that year. Sometimes it may look like, oh, we only appropriated fund balance of 74,000, but you got to look at it holistically. We had sales tax that met the delta increases for those years, especially in like 21, 22, 23, sales tax was on the rise. So you didn't need to appropriate as much fund balance because other revenue was meeting that budget gap. The perfect storm that we're experiencing and discussing today is that you don't have other significant source of revenue to meet those deltas between the increased operating costs every year, right? And in addition to that, because the belts have been tightened over time, you're not getting as much carryover. And that's on the revenue side. And then on the expense side, we have the other perfect storm anomalies of we had significant increases in healthcare costs this year, right? That are out of our control, and significant increases to retirement costs that are state mandated. And we needed to do, for the streetscape project, there was some debt issuances that need to be built in. And whether you built it in this year or next year you're gonna have bond payments, right, associated with this thing as it comes forward. So when you do all that and you're getting hit on both the revenue and the expense side, there's a gap, right? And it just happened to be, is how this budget felt, as how it happened this year.
You know, I think particularly like, you know, the front end of this is really helpful. You know, you can get in and see all the details, but like you just kind of noted, you know, on the general fund and expenditures, you point there's those four big things. There's the bond coming up, and then sort of like that, in some ways you might call it a gap financing, because we need to put money out in order to get things moving before we get the bond coming in. The personnel-related costs, the retirement and the health insurance. When you look at that, especially on the next page, you can see that those are the big, that right there are all the big things. And then as you start looking through the different sections, again, as we covered all the different departments, you know, we're not running around just kind of throwing cash around because,
Yeah, I
you
mean,
know,
all the
we just
budgets you
feel
saw
like- we
went
feel like
down just in order to massage where we're at
Yeah.
today. You know, and a band is a typical normal operating cost. Trustee Mitchell and I were just chatting about this in my office prior to the meeting. We have a $7.7 million general fund, right? The board authorized a $5 million contract that will be executed in the course of 6 to 7 months, right? Think about the cash flow needed for just that project. We're not talking about the basic operating costs, CHIPS funding, other work projects, storm sewer projects, sanitary sewer projects, sidewalk projects. All of those require cash to be upfronted before reimbursement, if they're reimbursable, can happen. So if you have a pay app or an invoice that comes from the contractor in May for April work that includes $1 million, right, which is very much something you should expect if it's a $5 million project on a 6-month construction timeline. By the time we get it, and depending on the timing that we get it, it may be a month before the next board meeting, and then you authorize that because we can't pay it prior to, per village law, per you guys authorizing it. And then we cut a check for that. It gets cashed in 2 weeks, maybe, right? So could be 6 to 8 weeks before that happens. Well, in that 6 to 8 weeks, guess what? In 8 weeks, you got 2 more invoices. They're coming monthly because they're having cash flow, construction companies, just like we are. So you're upfronting cash of $3 million. We just told you have $2.5 million in the bank, and you don't ever let your savings go to zero, right? So you can see the issue with that. Bans are very, very common in a bonding process for local governments to get you the cash that's needed. And because that, no bank or whoever the purchasing party is for this is going to give you free money to utilize for a year without making money on it. And that's what's happening here, right? It's a financing tool that we're utilizing to make these projects work, but there's a cost to do that.
Correct me if I'm wrong. It's really just to have the money to pay the upfront costs until we get reimbursed for these, and we need that cash flow for this project and for other projects that, yes, we're going to get reimbursed for, but if you don't have the cash to do it in the beginning, you can't do the project at all, because most everything that we take part in is, we get a lot of grants, we get a lot of funding, but it doesn't show up until,
Sure, we have 4 or 5
in,
grants sitting out there.
in some cases, 4 years after the project is done.
And in addition to that 6 to 8 week time frame or lag for just getting this approved and having the board authorize the checks and so forth, then there's a whole another 3 or 4 week process where the clerk's office is going to go through the arduous process of putting together a reimbursement application, having it submitted, reviewed by the state and whoever needs to do that, and then them wiring the cash over. It could be 2 weeks, could be 3 weeks, but there's also an administrative time frame for a week or whatever the case may be to get that out the door. So you can see how that time starts to stretch out naturally just due to the process.
So there's this $100,000 expense to have this money essentially available
Yes.
to us when we need
Yes.
it. Does that also include, we were speaking about just like attorney fees to actually even manage the whole bond and note
Well,
process?
there's a cost of bonding that's rolled up into the bond, but yes, there's a cost to get bond counsel to go through a process. I mean, I can tell you, we probably have 300 emails that have happened over the last year in order to facilitate this process. When it comes down to cash flow, showing our ratings, what we have in savings, our debt to cash ratio, they look at all of that. So when they go actually and sell our debt to whoever the purchasing entity is going to be, whatever bank or developer wants to buy that and hold that note, they want to guarantee that, hey, we are a good debtor, meaning we're going to pay our bills and there's not a whole lot of risk there. Higher the risk, just like buying a car, if you have bad credit, higher the interest rate, right? So you protect that, so when they do that, they'll say, well, fine, I'm willing to take on that risk for 3.5% for a 10 or 20-year note, whatever the bond's gonna be rolled in at, right? But if you have bad red or not a lot of cash, and somehow we default, they wanna know that they're gonna get paid. So you don't have cash flow, and you don't have significant means to meet those budget gaps, should there be a missed payment, or should you not be able to meet those obligations, they'll take on the risk, because bonds are federally backed, but they're going to charge a higher interest rate to do that, right? Otherwise, they're going to go buy somebody else's debt that's a sure thing, and they know they're going to get paid. No different than how a bank works, mortgage payments, all of that.
So I think it's fair to say that $100,000 is, there's some value for that.
Trust me when I tell you, we went
Yeah.
down the rabbit hole of,
Right.
do we have enough cash?
Is it-
Would this be happening? At the
Right.
end of the day, are you willing to risk your financial solvency and capacity and your bond rating and, quite frankly, the stress of making sure that you don't have the ability to pay? Megan informed me after our last budget meeting that we got to a certain point over the summer where we had about $75,000 in cash remaining in the bank, and that was it, to run collectively a $40 million company. That's scary. And that's just due to, it's not due
Is that
to
what the
financial
first payment.
prudence, it's just due to a lot of money coming in at one time. When do our revenues come in? When's the next sales tax coming in every quarter? How much cash is going out? When are the projects happening? When are people asking reimbursements? I mean, there's just operating capital that needs to happen. That's not something you want to experience all the time. It makes you nervous. So that's why.
So on the expenditure side of things, there's actually some deductions or some decreases in expenditures as compared to in the year prior to. That first one that's noted there on page 8, this, maybe you could speak a little bit more to that, the street maintenance contractual at $38,000 less than?
I believe that's associated with it, Oil and Stone. Right, so
What
in
is it?
addition to that, we used to fund Oil and Stone as a typical annual operating cost, right? We're doing it every year. It's a maintenance issue associated with maintaining our streets and providing longevity. Due to they're a long-term asset, they can be depreciated over a 7 to 10 year period, that amenity, that improvement. In addition to making sure this budget even got to where you're at 10.5% proposed, we removed that and put that into the capital plan to absorb because there was more cash there than there was in the operating budget. That's the truth of it.
So the oil and stone process was originally here.
In the operating budget, the
And now
general
it's in
fund, and now it's in the
capital plan.
capital. Correct, coming out of capital. Yep.
And then the miscellaneous $33,000 is,
So we're saying of everything that was significant in this budget, of these 10 line items, these are the ones that drastically controlling the anomalies in this budget. And only 33,000 out of 7.7 million is just random stuff, $1,000 there, $10 there, $15,000. So we were able to narrow the significant differences down to these 9 or 10
okay.
issues that are really impacting the revenue side of
We've
this.
reduced in this proposal IT to down $33,000.
Yes, that was a proposal to not have live feeds associated with planning, zoning, HBC, tree board, those types of things. They're still being recorded, they're still being archived, they're still being minutes carried, but just the recordings won't be available to the next morning and uploaded to the website and so forth and then published on social media and stuff. But the cost to do that then versus having it 12 hours later was a significant amount. That's something else that the board can, elect to go even further, maybe save another $10,000 or so, should you want to maybe do that with village board meetings.
So
Right?
currently
That's an
in the
opportunity for you
proposed-
guys to consider if you'd like to.
So from just, before you continue on, I just want to look at a data point. So from those meetings that we were talking about that have been, the live coverage has been reduced in this budget. Do you have any idea about how many people are on those meetings live?
Our analytics say that it's fairly de minimis. I think the question was proposed the other night during our meeting, and you're
Yep.
having
I'm
3,
just
4,
bringing it up
5,
again.
6 people there, and I will tell you most of the time that's staff. Because they want to watch and see what's going on, so they don't have
And
to
is
come
there
talk to you
data
about it the
on
next day.
the number of people who are actually watching it live versus the number of people who go back after the meeting has already occurred?
We can go and check like Google Analytics on the website to see who clicks on that, or like Facebook Analytics to see who clicks on our
And views it after the
our
meeting.
views. But it's not a lot. I mean, I look at those; they're not significant, right? And it could be something where in the future, say we have a topic we know is going to have a lot of interest, right, and a lot of people showing up. In times like that, we can always just say, hey, for that type of meeting, it's going to be pretty important, like a budget meeting, right? I think it's important to have that in real time. Come for that, right? Let's have it live. Let's have it on YouTube right now. That type of thing. Or whatever. If it's something big, maybe for zoning, like when we go to adopt the zoning code, right? Or we have our public process.
I mean,
Right? That's okay.
Some of our meetings are pretty routine where we're,
A lot of them are.
there's not
Real
real
and
exciting
I don't
things
blame
happening.
them. You're not going to get significant ratings watching a typical village board meeting here, right? I mean, they're due process, general business types things.
Right, if we were to go in the direction
You guys are
of-
exciting, but yeah, nobody's tuning in for that. It's just not happening. Wow. It's all of us, not you guys, all of us. It's just they're not.
Jeez. If we were to go in the direction and the board were to feel comfortable with having live, access to village board meetings, or not having live access on the actual day, but having it 12 hours later, do we know how much that would reduce the budget?
He'll be back in the room in just a
Oh,
minute, but I think in an earlier discussion about $10,000, right?
Okay.
Why don't you, while we're waiting for Brian to come back, why don't we just go around and,
So that we
does anybody feel a great level of concern if we limit the live meetings to those that have a significant interest to the public, or if someone is joining remotely? I'm just looking this way. Eventually, I'm going to sit at the end of this, so I can just look in one direction and go, how do you all feel about that?
I am totally fine with that. I think the vast majority of our meetings do seem to be very routine. There's not too much that's, like Brian said, there's not too much that's very exciting that happens. So if we were to forego that for all the meetings and just do it for select meetings, I would be okay with that.
What do you think, Adam? You look like you have a question.
No, I think I'm still turning it over. I don't know.
Let's put it this way.
Yeah.
We didn't always do live YouTube meetings.
Oh, yeah, I know that.
So,
And there was a time before the internet.
yes. Yes. And there was a time in between local channel or whatever the number was that was in that room, which is now our conference
Oh my
room.
gosh, yeah.
And it was broadcast on Time Warner or People's Cable or whatever it was in the middle. So just,
Yeah.
I find that the value is actually the storage and keeping of the meeting. I don't necessarily, I'm not saying that it's not valuable to see us right now here live. Hi, everyone. I do think, there is some value to that, but I don't think that it would reduce communication if the communication was just to be 12 hours later. And especially with the storage and opportunity to play that back as many times as our constituents would like to see it. I know at the town level, they have it recorded live, or they show it live, but then there's no access to it after it's recorded live at all. You can't.
Well, yeah,
Unless it's
you can
foiled.
you can foil it, but yeah, it's not a database like
Right,
we
and
have.
going through the FOIL process is quite, right, it's a thing.
Trustee Briggs, how do you feel about that?
I guess I agree with everyone that if it's right now, as long as we can have the recorded version is more valuable
I agree.
than necessarily live.
And to have the opportunity to be flexible in that when we have something of real, substance, if you will, and possible proposal to change or something like that, I think.
Like if we're doing zoning code or, a major project that we need to talk about and that we can tell that there's an interest, whether people want to come live or we also include it as a broadcast. I'm not opposed to, on the one-off occasions at all, to making arrangements to do that. It's the fact that for these typical meetings
Some
that we're
meetings are
having,
very straightforward.
Yeah. except for,
It's
like,
improving dental health and,
yeah,
and that would obviously reduce our expenditures by about $10,000. Brian, you think? It's something.
Approximately, yes.
It's something.
so if that's something that the board would like to entertain, let Brian know now and he can build that in. I think you heard positive
After you guys, we're gonna document everything that you guys kind of bring up associated with, you might be willing to, adjustment in revenue expense. And we have a budget dashboard, so we're gonna show you in real time today what your decisions do and what the impacts are to the levy and the rate. Okay? So you know exactly what you're voting on and what you're proposing. Okay.
Sorry, Ryan, as much as we like seeing you here in this room, Might be a little bit less in the future.
All right, two more you're gonna hit.
What are we gonna do?
Do you have more that you wanted to go through, Emily? And then if,
Well, I guess just to go in order here, there's a $20,000 less, right, the police department is spending $20,000 less in this proposed budget than last proposed budget. So these, I mean, there's significant whittling down here, I would say, on our departments.
I'm not so sure about that. It's
Oh.
just there's a lull due to retirements and then hiring new folks in that are at current, maybe different health insurance rates, possibly different ERS rates and
I'm sorry,
contribution
okay.
levels, and also different
So we're
salary
not
rates.
sacrificing on the operational.
Trust me,
end
it'll
of things.
eventually catch up.
Okay,
No,
okay.
there was a reduction in a request
So
for
we
some
act-
overtime stuff that we did just for the budget. It's still gonna be able to meet the needs
So
of
this
what they're doing.
benefited, there was something that actually benefited us this year?
It looks better this year, but that $20,000 decrease isn't going to stay there.
I gotcha.
moving
Okay, thanks for
forward.
clarifying that.
Yeah.
So new personnel change.
we'll take
Right.
anything
Costs
this
I
year that
agree.
we can.
We'll take it where we can get
I
it.
agree, let's do it. But you're essentially saying a new personnel cost, right, is different than it was?
Correct.
Okay, okay. And then the refuse collection is down $10,000 from last year's budget.
Yeah, we just looked at adjusting our tipping fees to downward, just associated with what we're seeing in tipping tickets, but it could be, hey, we have a really.
To better match what we actually see,
Right,
correct?
but they're
Okay.
they're not a constant, right? It could be a
Right.
really trashy year, if you will, and people get like, hey, it's basement cleaning time, and that could be up 10 grand. So
Okay.
it's give or take,
Okay,
right?
so it's just a prediction of it being,
A loose
A
one.
less
I mean, it's
trashy
based
year.
on analytics and history and what we do
I
and
gotcha.
cost per ton for tipping fees, but
Okay.
it's subject to change based on use
right,
and
and
what's
you're
going
being
on.
sensitive to what we,
Correct.
are
We're in the
trying-
ballpark.
yeah.
I'm not worried about missing the mark too much.
okay.
And if we're wrong, we'll blame it on Megan.
Can you speak to the increased costs? I mean, briefly, just this workers' comp increase of $26,000. Do we see this going on in this capacity for a number of years, or is this going to be a 1 year thing? What can we expect with that?
Repeat everything we talked about. All right. So.
Well, not
with-
that.
No,
You
we're good.
didn't
No,
really
no, no,
answer
no. Let's
that
talk about it. Let's talk about it. So there's two hits here. There's a revenue and expense thing going on. So with workers' comp, which is mandated by law,
Right.
your workers' comp premiums, like health insurance, are based on the experience or exposure level, claims level, right? The more claims you have, the higher your
Right,
premiums
no, I
get.
understand that. I'm just saying, like, for how many years can we expect this
I know.
26,000? Okay,
So this year, our premiums went up because we had experience levels, right, claims levels that were higher than what we normally would see. How long those stay in the actuarial, the review back time, is it 3 years, is it 5 years? Maybe Megan can speak to that. It's not a one-time, then it drops probably $30,000 next year. It doesn't work that way. As we continue to have maybe the next 3 or 4 years where we don't see any more significant claims, and things are pretty good and our staff's pretty healthy and you don't see true loss of time.
Right.
Injuries are okay, but when you start having loss of time or loss of work for periods of months, if not even a year, which we had a claim, a person was out almost a full year, that's a significant expense to a workers' comp insurer, which we're self-insured anyway.
I just didn't know
The-
if it's like your driving record. If you've had a clean driving record for a certain number of years, then they drop it back down.
That probably
it
is the
like
case, like anything, sure.
Okay.
The other side of that is, this year, we have a workers' comp reserve. Remember, we set that up, it's been there for quite some time. We used to put money in there based on any refunds we would get for doing really well with workers' comp. So in the past, we used to get $50, $100, $150,000 of maybe if we did really well, we paid our premiums, but hey, we just, you know what, everybody's been great. Public Works hasn't been doing anything crazy, falling off the garbage trucks, right? They'd send us a refund check for $150,000. So this year, we didn't get any check back, right? Insurance premiums went up. In addition to that extra premium cost, we took money out of the workers' comp reserve, inserted it into the general fund revenues to help subsidize that increase this year. So there's a lot going on there to smooth that out, and thank God we have that reserve. But the reserve's about $200-something, but once it's gone, it's gone. And it's meant to do that, just to work out premiums and any fluctuation. But, if this every year stays at $25,000 or $50,000 or whatever, you can only do that so many years. And after that, now you have this massive gap that you got to fill with taxes or some other revenue stream, right? So there's a number of things happening there that kind of created that scenario as well.
And workman's comp is not something that's you can
No.
say, hey, we're not gonna
And
pay
it,
that.
and it will
Let's
go
get
up
rid
every
of it."
year. Costs to that go up every year, but workers' comp is directly correlated to salary. So if you make $10,000 this year, and the next year you make $12,000, and that's across the board with every employee, the total liability, because they make up, it's a portion of your salary that gets paid out with this, in addition to medical claims, that all gets factored in as well. Okay. Overall, we've been really, really good. Our department heads teach PPE, toolbox safety all day long. Everyone here is pretty much certified first aid, AED, and CPR. They do a lot of great things. Jason's a stickler on it. I think FMC has probably one of the better track records. Police and fire, you're going to have some of those things from time to time. It's a dangerous business. It's a very reactionary business. There's scuffles, there's fights, there's reactions, there's slip and falls. You're always outside. Refuse, you're going to have those from time to time. It's back-breaking work, right? You're picking up significant weight. Things are going to happen. We have claims all the time throughout the year, but they're not significant loss of time claims, right? I cut my finger, tweaked my back a little bit. Feel pretty good. No loss of time. I'll be back to work. Ice it up, right? Those things are normal, but when you have significant ones where people can't work for a certain amount of time and the cost to rehab, go to the doctor, have surgery, that's when you really start triggering workers' comp reviews and heavy claims.
So in a direct response to talking about workman's comp or workers' comp, it's not workman's anymore, it's workers. When we put out to village residents, your garbage can or your trash receptacle is not appropriate because our folks can't lift it on the lever that lifts in the arm is called the arm. The tipper, when we can no longer pick it up on the tipper and tip it in, and it means now somebody's got to struggle with that and you're taking a greater chance on them getting injured, it directly influences what happens with workers' comp. So on the opposite side of that, our team, whether it's Mark Lindsay or Jason's team, has been trying to work with residents to get them to understand you can't put substandard trash receptacles at the road because if they're cracked and they can't be picked up with the tipper, we're taking a greater chance on injuring staff, and then that's going to influence our workers' comp.
Yeah, and most of our refuse is not picked up with the tipper. Very few people have that accessory. Most things are just put out in regular old cans, and you pick up 40 to 50 pounds, and maybe 2 or 3 cans per house, and you dump it. You do that repetitively for 600 or 700 or 800 stops a day. It's a lot of weight, right? You're picking up
Yes.
thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds in a given
That's
day.
why we make those requests to residents.
So we ask you to keep you in that 40, 50-pound range. And the Public Works has the ability to reject something that just doesn't make, the container's not right, it's too heavy, material's not appropriate, and they can reject that.
Jason wanted to add something.
We recognize that we had an uptick, or that we thought maybe we could make a positive impact on workers' comp claims by addressing and putting notices on the cans that were in some way broken so that they couldn't be dealt appropriately.
So I'm going to summarize what you're saying, so that anybody who's listening to this, do you want to come up and use the microphone to say this? That would be great, because then I don't have to try and restate what you're saying.
Directly referencing the conversation we were having about workers' compensation claims. What we had noticed was that we thought there was an opportunity for us to identify cans that were in some shape or fashion unserviceable, whether it was due to handles being torn off or the tipper bar being broken. And we started to place notifications on those cans to let people know that, hey, it's time to replace your can, because what was causing was the team to be able to cause them to have to lift it in an unsafe fashion, or a fashion that was lending itself to them having injury, whether back or leg. So that was the effort to those pink tags that you may have seen or heard about. It's just about education to the public, and making sure that it's front of mind for our guys to say, hey, if it's not safe, don't do it.
I just wanted to bring it up to go to show that while there is an increase in workers' comp, that our team is trying to do whatever they can to limit future issues that we have to pay out for by following good work procedures.
Absolutely, and paramount is that we take care of our people while we're taking care of our residents.
Thank you.
We want them to stay well.
Do you have anything else for right now? Okay. Trustee Tracy, did you have some questions?
Yes, I did, actually, from, let me see, let me get where I was. I was looking at last year's budget, and again, that we have no carryover from last year. Okay. Well, I'm on last year's budget.
Are you in the capital plan?
Yep.
But we can look at this year's capital plan to reference. Is that what you're speaking of?
Well, just a couple questions. I mean, I'm sure they're fine. So last year, we also bought a Ford Explorer for the police department. So they got a new car last year and a new car this year.
Yeah, they're an annual rotation.
So we're going to get a car every year. See, I didn't know that.
So, and it's also, if you look in your, so this is just the annual one. If you look at your 10-year capital plan that's in there, it'll show that rotation for the next 10 years based on which car they're being replaced. So it's in the kind of the Excel spreadsheet, the non-fun one to look at without the pretty colors and pictures.
I thought you'd walk us through that.
We can do that. More than happy to. Yes, those are all outlined for the next 10 years for all vehicle and equipment purchases. You have all of that based on the plan that we have.
But now I got it right here. Oh, we buy
Now
it.
you know.
We buy a police car every year.
When it's available, put it that way.
Also, like with the police department remodeling, we did some work last year in last year's budget.
We did. So this current year, because we're still in it till May, we were really looking at the feasibility of, before we go too far down the rabbit hole, seeing if there's an opportunity to do some design. Does the existing blueprints and so forth, does it lend itself to some renovations? Meaning, if you wanted to move a few walls, what are those made of? Are they concrete? Is it just a 2x4 wall? I mean, otherwise, why go down this thing if basically the bones of it can't be manipulated enough to make reasonable changes to the footprint to find how you want to operate or office space or how that's all going to be. And we found that it can be based on the existing, I don't know where Jason found the 200-year-old blueprints, but we found them. So that was analyzed. So now we're looking at, a deeper dive into, now that we know we understand what the bones or behind the drywall looks like, what are some opportunities for efficient setups, wall removals, or reconfigurations of that space that might lend itself just a better flow and a better operation and a better setup. I don't know what's going to come out of that process. They're just engaging an engineer to do that as we speak, and we'll see what that looks like. But you're going to design it to what we can afford or what we want to do. Maybe this process doesn't yield anything, and we don't do anything at all besides clean it up and paint it or whatever. But we were just going to take a look at doing that. I mean, it is what it is. It's two people mostly on duty at any given time outside of the day shifts. But it's probably time for some, if there's an opportunity to do it efficiently and effectively, maybe there's some opportunities to do some rehabilitation and invest some money into it. But I just don't know what that's going to look like yet. We're just too early in the process and whatever we kind of look at or what the options might be, all that's going to come before the board so you can analyze or review it and kind of see what's being proposed. right, before we do anything.
Can I speak a little bit more to that?
Sure.
So it sounds like Jason was able to find the blueprints. He knows where the sort of the load-bearing walls are, the existing structure, right? So there seems to be maybe some feasibility in terms of possibly working a remodel in that space that currently houses the police department.
There's some opportunities.
There's
Whether those
possible- okay.
opportunities lend itself to what they want to see there, I don't know.
What can't be
but
changed is obviously the
There's
square.
opportunities to do something,
The
maybe.
square footage is what the square footage is.
Yeah, that's
It's
not
a
gonna
s-
change.
It's a super small space.
Yeah, we're not looking at like adding 30 feet onto the front of the building or anything like that. You got to work within the confines of that, what you have.
I mean, I know in the past, just because I've served on the board for 5 years, that there has been some discussion about Station 2 and utilizing, when you look at this Station 2 from Whitney, right, the left-hand side of that property.
So,
Is that an
without
economically?
getting in all of that
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
we've discussed that, met on site, met with all the parties associated with this. Well, I think there's opportunities to do something over there. There's times when it's like, well, how do you share certain spaces when people are there? There's bathrooms that are only on the west side of the building, even though all the police department's gonna be using the east side, so now you're putting new bathrooms in. If you're gonna use the east side of that building, the configuration needs to change. I mean, you could be looking at, well, just moving over there. It's not just moving over there and putting the police department badge on the door and calling it a day. It'll be $1 million remodel, right? So there's just, how does that coexist, and do you really need this room? It's not as easy as I thought it would be. Hey, just take over that east side, work within the bones that you do, but it doesn't serve how the police operates currently. So we've had those discussions, and it will be just a challenging one because, like anything, I want to keep my space. I don't want to share it. There's a lot to this type of thing, and more than happy to have more discussions on it. But it wasn't as simple as because if it was just, hey, move over there. Here's a can of paint. Let's put some carpet on the walls. Let's get everything cleaned up, new furniture, and call it a day. We would have done that years ago. It's much more involved than that.
I don't doubt at all that there needs to be. I mean, I believe that the police department hasn't been remodeled since the 80s, and that might be generous. I'm not even sure about
Yeah.
that, so I don't doubt that this is something
Yeah,
that's
it's
needed.
Stated.
Thank you for that. So yeah, we did a little design feasibility. This year, we're going to take it next step
Correct.
and do some design.
Like I said, it
see
may
where
not
that goes.
materialize, but we'll see what comes out of it.
Mount Pleasant Cemetery improvements. We did 10 grand last year. Is this, and then another 10 this year?
No, this is a carryover from, we didn't get the work done this year. We don't think we're gonna have it done between now and in May. So we just carried that work over into this year to have that money available for June. So yeah, it's not additional money, just carrying it over. Same thing with like the Kennelly Park roof and ceiling as well.
Yep. Let's see. How about the door securities and lock sets? Is
Yep.
that a carryover?
So it is a carryover, but what we were looking at doing next year, it's I think from what Jason was saying, it's much more involved and comprehensive, and it's gonna cost a little more than what we were initially thinking. So we just moved this project into the next year, so we have more time to take care of it more comprehensively. I mean, I think that's fair, right, Jay? Yeah.
So we didn't do it last year.
Correct.
Bringing it over. See, these are all good questions, at least in my mind.
No, good questions. Yep.
Okay, so we still are planning on doing something with the pocket park? That's up until May or June?
I
This
don't
budget?
believe we're gonna do anything with the pocket. What you talking about, the one over on Parson Barnum?
Yeah.
As of right now, associated with the work we were doing, knowing this budget would come in, we put that on hold. If it's something the board still wants to do, we can reallocate. But right now, with everything going on, we chose not to do that. We weren't gonna get anything in there this spring like we wanted to. And I also said, with the money that we were looking at doing, to do anything of substance there wasn't gonna materialize a whole lot. If that's something the board really, really wants to do with everything, we can revisit it.
I'm just
Yeah, no, I'm not saying,
looking
I'm
at
just trying to
last
respond.
year's
Yep,
budget,
yep.
and we don't have carryover, and I'm just
Yep.
trying to make comparisons as to
And
how
with the
we're
workload,
going.
there was no way we were gonna get to it this spring, and that's the only time we
Fine.
were gonna be able to do it anyway.
Okay,
Yep.
I think those are my questions.
Brian, what was allocated in last year's budget for the pocket park?
I think it was 150 or 70, so 75,000, right, we was reduced.
75.
So
75,000.
essentially because the Northeast Canal Bank has been added to the proposal of the
Capital work.
capital. So we've essentially,
We probably spent more than anything that we ever had allocated for
So it's essentially
the
The
south.
Southeast Bank
The
became,
Southeast.
became a thing, yeah. I mean, we had crews out there the entire construction season last year with
So
internal labor doing work.
That work was not funded anywhere last year.
Jason was
and-
optimistic. He thought, oh, we'll be another at the end of April, and September, we're still sitting around there. So, but it was a lot of work, and it runs
But it
into
looks beautiful.
utilities, it runs into brick, it runs into rod, it runs into a number of things, depression, sinkholes in the footpath. I mean, it just kept kind of going and going.
But to
every
get
time you
back to
overturned
it,
something. Correct.
it was an unfunded project that we found that we really had to take care of once you started looking into it,
From a labor
correct?
standpoint, that's correct. Correct.
Okay. Are you good, Trustee Briggs?
I am good. I am
Okay.
good.
I'm going to skip over you for a minute, Emily. I'm going to go down to this side. Heidi, do you have any questions?
Not too many questions, I think just a few, but I do appreciate I know you said it was a snoozer in the beginning, the description and the budget message. I think that helps give the framework to the rest of the information that's presented in the packet. I do like that. Looking at the fee schedule, are just the changes, are those the ones in red?
That's accurate.
Can you tell me what page you're on?
I am on page 106.
Thank you.
So I know that was something we had talked about for, it is in Appendix 2. Yeah. That, I didn't have very many other questions, just from, some were just my understanding, when you're looking at those landscape-oriented pages of the budget.
Line items, yeah.
And I just was not sure what some of the things were describing, so that's basically what my questions are.
So fire away, which ones
Okay.
are you referring
Down
Page-
to the
to?
fee schedule?
No, not the fee, I'm past the fee schedule.
Okay.
My only
We
question
could,
was the,
we can probably respond to almost anything you have, so.
yeah, that's what I figured.
Sure.
Okay,
Feel
so
free.
what page are you looking at now?
I am on page 4 of 42 in Appendix 5.
Okay. That helps.
Appendix
Well, I'll
five.
just get
Yes.
to the same place.
Oh, you're talking about
In Appendix
Yeah,
5.
yeah.
number at the bottom,
It's the
129.
kind, where? Are you seeing it?
So there's
Oh,
there's
God,
a
there's that
4 of
one?
42 up on the
Okay,
page.
or 129 of 196.
There we
Sorry.
go.
All right,
got
there we go.
that.
We'll go with that one. Okay.
Okay,
What just looking through this, I was just looking for like larger differences, like bigger percentages. And looking at, on 129, the public works services, the variance recommended was 233%. Is that just because of the scope of work that we're gonna be doing overall for? It's a revenue, okay, I just wanna make sure I didn't. Because that's an increase, otherwise it's a minus if it's a
Yeah, that's just
loss.
going from.
Okay,
From what we got last year.
Yeah.
Back against the new budget.
Yeah, so our percentage looks like a lot, it's 1,500 to 5,000. And it was
Right.
based on the actual cost from last year.
okay.
Yeah, so we just kept it the same.
I just want to make sure I know what I'm looking at. Don't really have very many other questions. I very much appreciate the graphs and the charts. It makes it very easy to understand what it is I'm looking at and how different variables affect it, and the descriptions in the front were really helpful. So I don't have a lot of questions. So, but thank you. That's it.
Adam, did you have some more that you wanted to ask about?
No, I mean, toward the end, when we were chatting, Brian, I think as a board, it's important as we also start looking forward, that I can, I guess a little bit of whiplash real quick, if we go back to,
Just let everybody know what page you're going to.
yeah, that's what I'm working on right now. What page was that? That's at the end of the,
You know about the financial forecast? Because that's something we should spend a little time on. Are you talking about the financial forecast, Adam?
I think
Is that
so.
what
Which
you're-
page is that one again? Is that the one we're looking at the next couple of fiscal years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, which one?
Page 61.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yep, that's exactly where I was going.
Yep.
Was
It's our-
just,
it's
you
our
know,
favorite page, too.
yeah, how we want to, I think it's important to know what we're looking at this year, but we also understanding, the impacts on the next couple of years and the types of discussions that we at least want to, pin in the back of our heads, looking forward in terms of just how we think things might shake out, knowing that, there's your crystal ball is probably as crystal as we can get it.
Well, let's go over
Which
it.
is sometimes as clear
Because
as
a
mud.
lot of our assumptions and why we're proposing what we're proposing is based on what we believe to be accurate with forecast. And you need to be comfortable with that, right? Because if you're not, and you disagree with the philosophy behind it, you can do whatever you want with appropriation of fund balance and so forth, and hopefully it materializes. I have no idea if we're gonna be right or not. 1 second, let me just try I'm gonna pop it up on this screen.
But you have an educated guess
Yes.
Right,
I think
based
we're-
on
from, based
experience.
on your
Close, but yeah.
experience.
Yeah. Well, and all the hard work you all put in. I mean, and that's where that experience comes from. That's what puts us in such a great position to be able to have these types of discussions.
Well, and also, I think one of the things that's really nice is that Brian brings to the
Most of
table
them went
is
up 50 to
discussions
100%.
with other administrators across the state and see what they're seeing. I know that gets shared with me when we're having a casual discussion is, I talked to all these other county administrators and municipal administrators, and this is what they're seeing, and it looks like just what we're seeing here. Did I summarize that thought appropriately?
You did.
Page number.
That our budget is not an
61.
anomaly from across the state.
Right.
Well, I mean, when you think about 65 to 70% of our budget being personnel related,
Yeah,
that's more than 3/4 or about 3/4 of our budget. And those are where we see the increase in expenses.
and everybody's feeling that pinch.
A little harder to see for folks, but let's,
Do this.
I know, but just wanted to. Because this is really important, and this is what we're basing everything on.
All right, focus.
Oh, I got laser pointers. You want laser pointers?
So let's run through this whole thing, right? We're used to looking at it so our eyes fit where we see.
Sorry.
Okay. There you go. Let's do it.
For those of you who don't know, Brian did multiple years of instruction on municipal budgeting.
So the forecast, right? So we base things on not just what's happening today, but what are the decisions that we're making today and how do they compound us in the future? What are those impacts? What's it doing for cash? What's it doing for reserves? Is it meeting the expectations? How is that impacting the tax levy, the tax rate? This calculation says all of that in real time every time you make a change. So even right now, you guys can say, you know what, Brian, we think you're off. We think sales tax is going to go up next year by 1%. We put it in there. It'll tell you exactly what happens to the rate, the levy, fund balance projections, and what the compound effect is for next year and the year after, right? Go ahead.
Sorry, just real quick, out of curiosity, because this is one of the reasons why I think it's so important to recognize all the work that you put in. If we come in and we decide, oh, you're totally wrong, sales tax is going to go up by $100,000, I know it won't.
Yeah.
But if we say that's what we're going to do and that's what we approve for the budget, at the end of the year, what happens to the taxpayers? We have a little whoopsie, and then we have to go back and
You find $100,000 in fund balance to make up the delta that didn't materialize, or you tax $100,000, which is 4% in the budget.
Right.
Well,
So you have to go back
65,000 is
and
2% now.
We have to kind of walk to everybody's front door basically with our hat in our hand and say,
Well,
hey,
we could be doing that too. I mean, we're generally close because we live and die on this thing, but you never know. You could be with the best intentions, and after all these conversations that we're going to have and the comprehensiveness of what we're talking about, I mean, the due diligence is there, but we could be wrong. You just don't know what's going to happen. Market crashes, the economy doesn't like what's going on, presidential issues, a war happens. I mean, you don't know. You don't know.
I am so
And all
sorry.
of the-
I am so sorry I asked this question.
Right, but no,
COVID.
but I will tell you, these are the
The great-
conversations that we have
COVID.
every day when we
Yeah.
go through this process. How that's impacting it, what's happening. You know, we're upset that we didn't get the state budget proposals to see what was going on, so we know how to incorporate these in here. That budget should have been adopted, right? It should be here, and it's not. What happens with that? We don't know what's going to happen. We have significant judgment calls based on CHIPS allocations, funding, grant programs, and other types of revenues. Those don't materialize, we're going to come back here and talk to you about it, right? But Jason right now is securing work for about $800,000 worth of things that the revenue may not be there come June 1. I don't know, right? So these are all assumptions we could be wrong on. You're not talking about this because we do this on our end. That's what you pay us for. But that's what's going on with all this. And we're trying to make it work and not stretch ourselves out, but you just don't know. So let's just go through this sheet. And I want you to understand exactly what you're looking at. It's really important because you're going to be asked about this with your constituents. You need to be able to explain what's happening here and why you made the assumption calls you did. Because what's going to happen is, as we talked the other night, is it looks to me that you've got 6 figures worth of revenue or savings that you could have appropriated and you didn't do it based on some craziness that your village manager said may or may not happen in 2 years, right? Because anybody wants to say something different, that's the story, and you're going to have to be able to respond to that, okay? So let's just start off. In total revenue, so let's go up to your top sheet here. Let's start here. Okay? This is your existing budget numbers that were adopted, this column. Everybody sees that? Okay? Your total revenues, your total expenditures, these are your major revenue sources, and these are your major expenditure sources. And these are the ones that are fluctuate or somewhat volatile that we want to make sure that we're able to manipulate to forecast certain things. That's what you're seeing on this page. So your first column, projected year-end 24-25. This is where we think, I have one right here. Oh, I like that one. Look at you, big spender over here. You need to get me something nice, Megan. All right. So this is our projected year-end cost. This is where we think we're going to be at by end of the year. We're probably pretty close, right? So based on those, which we think are our true revenue and spending plan assumptions, we made assumptions. So we're saying, and this is our proposed budget that you have here, the proposed 25-26. These is what's in your budget right now, this column. All right? So what we did is based on, should this be adopted today, your assumptions say right here for property taxes, 5%. Does everybody see that? Okay. We're proposing a 5% increase in property tax revenue in fiscal year 26-27 and 27-28. And when you do that, you can see how that number climbs, right? This year it's $3,580,000, and then next year if you added 5% and if you had a property tax of 5% increase, you'd have $3,759,000. You guys see that? Okay. And you do that through the entire course. Sales tax, we made an assumption of if we think this year our projected year end is $2,049,000 in sales tax, and I bet we're pretty close. There is no economic factors that we're aware of and feel comfortable enough to make a judgment call to think that sales tax is going to be much different than what it is today, right? Our bills that we're getting, our checks, they're fluctuating 4 or 5% in either direction and canceling each other out, right? We were really hopeful over the Christmas time that, hey, we saw a jump, and then we get something that kind of comes back and naysays that. The automobile market is in flux right now with tariffs, right? It's a huge factor in how you do that. You start adding 30% tariffs on automobiles, those sales don't happen. So you look at all those types of things. Is that really going to come into effect? Is it going to impact aluminum, steel, big appliances, big purchases? All those types of things. Does that now start to curb buildings, new development, structures, construction materials, right? Those are things that matter. You going to Walmart and spending your $100 a week is not what we're talking about, right? That's not what we're making judgment calls on.
Is 1% generous based on what you're saying?
I think 1% equates to what, 35, 40,000, Megan, ish? Ish? Okay. So if we said, okay, it'll go up 1% next year, we'll say that means we're going to get about $40,000 more in sales tax revenue. Maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. But last year when we were sitting in this room talking about sales tax, there was a discussion about, you might be a little conservative, maybe we should go up a point or two. Well, it didn't happen. And that was what our recommendation was, is to stay flat, right? Again, it's a guess. You never know what's going to happen. But the trends are showing that. The state's trends and projections are showing that. And people that are saying, hey, sales tax is doing better than we thought or than what we budgeted, just because you budgeted wrong, right? Our assumptions are coming in meeting where we said they were going to be. People say, hey, sales tax is up 6% from last year from what we budgeted. You were just off 6% last year. We weren't. And that's just the truth of it. That's what's going on with it.
So you were more on the conservative end last year, so you're saying it's going to be a 1% increase perhaps this year?
No,
Or for
we're
the
saying for
proposed-
26, 27, we're anticipating a modest 1% increase. If we see this year, things change and we're really seeing some extra money, we can always, for next year's budget, say, you know what, things are getting better. Consumer confidence is really good. Everybody's flying high. Let's move that to 2%, right? And we can make an adjustment next year. So even though we're projecting a 5% increase in the tax levy for the next 2 years after this adopted budget, maybe that goes to 3% each year instead of 5%, because sales tax, which is our second largest revenue stream, is starting to increase. And we can make that judgment call. But right now, we don't know that. So when we talk about forecasting and making sure that we're giving you spending plans that you can live by, explain, and also keep you into a good financial position, these are good recommendations. But they also give you the ability to adapt and to amend those decisions based on economic factors and real-time expenses and revenues that are coming in and going on, right? And that's what we want you to be able to do. If you put all your eggs in basket this year on information that's really not there or flawed, and then in 2 years you have no ability to react to whatever's going on, that's going to be a problem for you. And as we talked about last time, we don't want to be off on this too much. We know for a fact we're going to come before this board in the next 12 to 18 months and ask you guys for another bond for storm sewer work. There are certain factors that have to be in place in order you get favorable bonds and incur good faith debt, right? Eroding at all of your fund balance and putting maybe appropriating $250,000 this year, especially knowing these forecasts, which the bond companies and rating companies are going to see this budget. They request it, they dig into it, they get our budgets, they get our cash statements, they get all of that is provided by law. They're going to review it and it's saying, based on that, and you know that you're going to have 5, 6, 7% increases and your fund balance is going away at 10% or 15% a year, what's going on? Is this a good decision? So when we factor all those other things in comprehensively, that's why we're making certain recommendations where they are. Maybe they are a little conservative, but you pay us to be, right? It's not my money that I'm gambling with. It's yours and the residents' money that we're gambling with. That's the difference.
Real quick, I know you were saying just to anticipate, another bond issuance next year. How much? Because over the past 12, 18 months, we've been, you and Jason have been learning really about the extent of
It'll be a ban next year and a bond the following year.
Right.
Yes.
Well, right. Yeah.
So we have the same conversation again.
As you've been learning more, like the extent of that. I mean, with our planning, were we in a position where shifting to adjust for that?
What do you mean? Like with cash over borrowing?
Yeah, just
You have no
because
cash.
like how you're saying, we have some debt that comes off, but that's good because then you turn that into the next capital project, right?
Yep.
Were we at a point where that was
There is
not as
additional
big a
debt
deal?
coming on after that, I think maybe in 2 or 3 years with some fire station stuff.
Without the storm, we were gonna have 1 year overlap. This comes off in 26, 27.
Megan, can
Oh.
you say this into that microphone, please?
Yeah, it's on.
Oh,
I mean, you
sorry,
could-
sorry, just into the.
You can even see in your forecasting models, we put that in
Just say it
there.
into the microphone, thanks.
We have in here new debt on our expenses, streetscape,
Right.
120,000.
Yeah.
New debt storm sewer, 70,000.
Okay.
And then what you also say is new debt storm sewer in 27, 28 goes from 70,000 to 175.
Because that's like
Because
the work
that's going to
is-
be your principal and
yeah.
interest payments associated with the $1.5 million bond expense
And that's the Winding.
for the Winding Brook
the
neighborhood.
Winding Brook,
So we
okay.
built that in knowing that we're going to have that expense, so you know what the impact of that decision is before you go out and incur those liabilities.
Okay.
So we put all that in here so you have it, so you're making good decisions.
Yep.
You know, and if you want to adjust these assumptions, let's do that. And if it materializes to a different number, fine. But this is important.
Yep.
And if you don't believe in this philosophy, then we can change this to make the budget match whatever you want. Rent over real property, that's contractual at 2%. Fire protection services, it's about a 2 or 3% increase in that budget every year. We know that's a fairly constant. Interest and earnings, we have it at 0% interest and earnings over the next 3 years, so it stays the same. Why? Because fund balance is going to be eroded as we continue to talk about what we're doing. Cash flow is an issue with all the projects that's going on, right? So we're not sure whether, and interest rates are going lower. That's a fact. And over the next 2 years, they should be drastically less than what they are. Interest rates are awesome to be low when you want to borrow and do work, but they suck when you're trying to use it as a revenue source, right? So it's a love-hate thing. And then all other revenues, everything in our budget, as you know, is pretty stagnant. Property taxes, sales tax, and everything else pretty much floats in the same ballpark every year. So we have modest revenues of 1%. That's why if you want to make true impact, we got to come up with some crazy things to do for revenue. Let's build a Ferris wheel, charge $20 a ticket. I don't care what we do, but find something else that we don't have to turn the property tax knob on, right? It's worthy of doing that. You don't have the ability to get increased assessed valuation. You don't have the ability to annex property, right? And the investment that's been going on in the village and the real property that's been rehabbed and or renovated or changed over, you're starting to hit your saturation limit on that. You have 1.5 square miles of real property to do something with. And most people are taking advantage of most of those things that are in the village. At some point, that's going to slow down too because there's just nothing else to invest in, right? And then what? Your expenses, the same thing. We have assumptions in there about what's going on. You can see them before you, but we have things like IT contractual services going up 3% a year all day long. That's probably low. That's probably low. Matt was here, he'd tell me it's low. Central garage, 3% a year. You're telling me parts and labor don't go up more than 3% a year? Of course they do. We're not actually saying those are correct. It's probably closer to 5 or 6%, right? Salaries and wages, 2% a year. Steps, who knows what's happening with hiring. We can't keep and recruit and retain people now with what we're doing. I can't keep a public works person or an electric employee to save my life, right? Even with the adjustments that we put in this budget, I don't want to say it out loud, but we made just a de minimis amount to everyone's salary, like $1 an hour. It doesn't do anything. It's more of a, hey, we appreciate you. We're trying to do something. We're trying to live within the confines of it. We recognize the work that you do. We know the budget's really high. We can't do significant adjustments, but we're trying, right? Right? That's included in this budget. FICA is an impact of whatever your salaries go up, if you go up salaries 3%, there's another 7.65% on that 3% for FICA. That's your Social Security. The big ones here, health insurance. We did a 12%er. Are we off? I don't know. This year was 16. Next year's 12.5. So we're pretty close, right? And what's the following year after that? It's going up 8 to 12% on average every single year. One year you may have a 5%, then you have 15 the following year, right? It's crazy what's going on with healthcare. We are an unhealthy society, and those premiums continue to climb. And then ERS and PFRS payments. I would love to get our hands on the comptroller's office associated with this and learn more about it and how they do the actuaries and what they're investing in, because that's what really matters. The point is, whatever you're putting in, there should be enough return on that investment to keep up with the inflation associated with people retiring and the needs associated with that. The only time they go up is when that doesn't materialize, and it seems to be doing that quite often, right? Significantly, double digits. When you have an $800,000 expenditure line and that goes up 10%, it's 80 grand. It's a lot. Doesn't seem like a lot for us, but 80 grand on a $7.7 million budget is extensive, right? $65,000 exactly is a 2% increase in our levy. That's the difference. It used to be 50 grand. That's what we always said. It's 65 exactly. I did the calculation before I walked in, right? It's a lot. Workers' comp, 2%. Operating expenses in general, 5%. None of those are off balance. And none of those are saying it's too high. If anything, they're low. So with that being said is, let's just do this whole projected 26, 27 year. Let's look at this. Okay, this column. What we're saying here is, and you can look at it, for revenues for 26, 27, we're talking about $7.9 million. Does everyone see that, the top? Total expenses, $8.1 million. All right? That's a $200,000 gap between expenses and revenue. It's got to come from somewhere. So what we're saying is, if that's what you're going to do, and tax 5%, you're going to have an estimated tax rate of $8.68, moving from the $8.43 you're at today. The average home value going up, what did we say, roughly $4,000. Estimated tax bill goes from $1,522 if everything stayed the same today to next year $1,598. So you're looking at a roughly $80 increase in everyone's tax bill for the fiscal year 26, 27, should it be adopted as estimated here, okay? Which is a $76 increase. But you're using $200,000 in fund balance to do that. And then the following year, you're using another $211,000. These things are directly tied to your fund balance down here. So using that $200,000 in 26, 27 and the $211 in 27, 28, you go from 33% fund balance this year, as we sit here today, in 2 years to 25.74. You've eroded 8% of your fund balance, right? What is that, 26% decrease in fund balance? It's not sustainable long term. But again, a lot can happen in 3 years. You don't need to start saying today what you're going to do. But I can tell you in the interim, we're going to look at what types of other grants can we utilize to subsidize operating costs that we know we're going to have, right? Where can we reduce capital outlay expenses to reduce our liabilities with grants? Don't go out and do grant work that you just, it's because I want to do it. Do the things that you're obligated by law to do. The unsexy storm, sanitary, roads, those are expensive. They're the cornerstone of why we exist. Do those projects first and try to find funding to subsidize that work, because that's a big part of what you do, right? Our cash allocation this year, 400 grand, next year 450, and the next year 475, is totally based on doing all that work in-house without grants. Should you get more grants and we figure out what we're doing and how we do it, maybe we can reduce that allocation. That allocation that goes to cash is directly from an interfund transfer from the general fund, right? Things don't get cheaper. So every year you push that out, add 20% to that cost of that capital work. So in 2 years, who knows what's going to happen? So you're going to want to be able to do it. If sales tax pops around, we look at other revenues, maybe you guys get into the parking game, right, and start charging for that. Parking's not free. Whatever it is that we do, we can look at opportunities to do that. But sitting right here, you don't have those options available to you. So we got to say, based on the existing infrastructure and what we do, that's fine. Maybe in 3 or 4 years, you don't have a police department. Maybe we don't pick up trash anymore in public works. I'm just saying, you never know what's going to happen. But those are conversations that are probably going to happen and should happen, right? I wouldn't say ever to get rid of either of those things. They're really, really important to do. People value that stuff. It's nice to have be able to reaction, to have good law enforcement, good public works. But it's not a 1-to-1 ratio with Public Works. If you got rid of refuse and recycling for Public Works and say there's 4 people that generally do that work, I'm not reducing my staff by 4 people, maybe 2, because those people do other work besides that, right? And I still have to have people that I'm gonna do for seasonal work when I gotta do snow removal all season.
The other
Right? And
piece,
not to mention construction fluctuates. This year I may have a lot, next year I may have a little. I can't keep hiring every 6 months to meet the workload.
I just want to add a comment to what you just said. It's not wrong to discuss these things.
No.
It doesn't mean that we're going to do everything that you're bringing up and talking about in a few years, but it's okay to have the conversation to see how it impacts what you're trying to do for your community. And if you don't ever have that conversation, that's just as bad as saying, we're going to fire we're getting rid of everything.
But I will tell you, I mean, no matter what service we do, and I would never propose removing any of those things, they're not going to come from our budget, or our proposals anyway. They're vital to what we do. Everyone is running on a very, very efficient organization and efficient working model, right? And so at some point, you got to say, hey, listen, we got to live, work, and be willing to accept whatever the output is for the resources we have available. You know, we have a tendency to kind of be our own worst enemies on a lot of this stuff. You know, it's like, why aren't we doing this? Maybe we should have had that painted. Why is there weeds over there? Well, there's only so much you can do. And right now, we've set an expectation of just here all the time, and it's hard to keep that momentum all the time. Right? And as people come here, those expectations are put upon us. And once you set a tone, it's really challenging to reduce that, right? People want to see that. Why are we doing that? How dare we have a cracked sidewalk, right? It's an amazing task. Not to mention, you all in this staff is doing 40 times more work than this village has ever done. Ever done. A lot of this stuff is delayed maintenance and replacement costs that just wasn't done in a depreciating, proper capital plan scheduled work, right? So all of a sudden you're doing a reactionary model and trying to budget to kind of pick up the pieces and fix all this in a very short amount of time. It's challenging, right? We want to do that, and we see failing infrastructure, and this is not unique to us, it's everywhere. We see failing infrastructure that needs attention today, and we need to be able to say, well, you know what? I'm probably not going to get to that for 10 years. I'm not disagreeing with you that your street is falling apart, but what do you want me to do about it? But when you have the complaint on the other end and the person screaming on the other end, and they want results, and they deserve it, by the way. They're paying taxes. They should be able to deserve, in a nice community, have a great street to work on. They should have good storm sewers and sanitary sewers and good sidewalks and good street lighting. They should expect that, right? So they're really challenging. So you're always trying to balance between what you can do and what that perception is and what the desires are. It's never going to mesh, and there's always going to be a friction point to that.
Brian, I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm just thinking in terms of the revenue stream, right? If we don't have any money that's earning interest, right? Or we have less money that's earning interest, we have less revenue coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a small amount that you'd be comfortable with at least putting in, so that if, let's say, the market does exceptionally well, we would at least have something or some skin in the game that would allow us to take advantage of the interest that could be accrued on that?
Right now, we just don't have a lot of money where it's going to make a difference. And even if we'd have stayed at 3.5%, and I had 300,000 or more in fund balance, you're talking about $5 or $10 grand. We're talking about very de minimis amount of money. So none of that's going to materialize to anything of fruit for this conversation.
Okay.
It's just not.
I just thought I'd ask.
You know. No, it's a great question, and I appreciate it.
I mean, rather having-
But the type of interest we're talking about and the type of money we have in fund balance, we're not talking about significant amounts that make that big of a difference.
Okay.
You know, the days I think I've seen $65,000 to $85,000 in interest, we're not going to see that much longer. You're barely ever going to see stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking revenue.
Oh, I love it. We can do it. I don't think it'll materialize to the point you're talking about. I mean, if you want to make an adjustment of $5,000 or something like that, maybe in revenue, we can try that out. We were a little conservative on the interest, but we just know that the cash balances aren't there. You can't accrue on interest on money that's not sitting in the bank.
Sure.
And when
And
she's
there
pulling it out
isn't-
from NICLAS, which is an investment portfolio that we use, once it's pulled, it's gone. It's not coming back in, right? And we only pull it out once we know the expense is coming in, like the invoice and stuff, we're not pulling it out, just sitting, oh, we think we might get some bills in a couple of weeks, let's do that. All right, so it's in real time. But if you wanted to do a $5,000 thing, I mean, it's not even worth the conversation, the argument about it. I don't think it changes much in this model. But you can do it. You can do it. Sure.
I'm looking in both
Megan, what are
directions.
your thoughts about that? Like,
About adding $5,000 of interest.
yeah,
This was my recommendation to Brian, just to give you some background. Briggs Railroad are starting in April, May. I have to front all of that money. And then
And it's
Streetscape starts
over
in
$500,000.
April. And that's about $520,000. And then Streetscape, I have to front. I don't think,
it's not.
yeah.
It's not there.
Yeah,
Well, you're fronting that.
and
You're
we
fronting
start
CHIPS
June
funding.
1. We start June 1 with low fund balance. I mean, we collect taxes in June and July, and luckily by July, we have money, but,
No, I appreciate the
it's,
the transparency of
yeah.
it.
And
We have
just
half
looking
our
at the
revenue within
fund-
the first month of our fiscal year, which is great.
Yeah.
Most people actually have to go out and do revenue anticipation notes because
Mm-hmm.
the way their local laws are and their code, they don't collect taxes maybe 6 months into the fiscal year. Well, now you're running on serious cash flows until 50% of your revenue
Mm-hmm.
comes in, or whatever your ratio is, which is a fairly common one, by the way. We're really lucky to have this. The moment you guys adopt this budget, goes in June 1, boom, we hit the button, bills go, right? It's fantastic, right? If you're gonna have to collect it anyway, what does it matter about the timing, right? So,
Thank you, Megan.
and that's just a big thing with it. I mean, this year, Dewey's all being redone, Roselawn's being redone, Packet Boat's being redone, to catch basins, tree trimming. We had collapses today on Roselawn. Full catch basins, full crocks, pipe, everything went out today. Significant work is going to be happening there in the next couple of days. I told Jason just to put some,
Yeah, I saw
newspaper
some of
over
that
and call
coming
it a
home
day.
today. I
It's
was like,
covered up. He goes, I think it's bigger than that. I said, okay, use cardboard. It's fine. I actually have the text messages to prove it. And thank God that's work that we're doing this year with storm sewers is on Roselawn. It needs to happen, right? Delayed maintenance on those streets, and they're very old. They're very old.
So I'm going to ask the board, does everybody feel comfortable where we are with this part of the conversation? I have a question that's going to change direction, so I don't want to leave this if you still have questions that you want to talk with Brian about
With those
this.
forecasts, you got to stand by them, right? You got to believe in them. Don't do it because we're making the recommendation and you don't want to go against it. Does everyone understand what they're looking at with that sheet? Do you agree with the assumptions in generality about what's going on there? Okay. Those are the big ones that fluctuate that we can put some stuff to. All the rest don't fluctuate so much. That's why you don't see all the line items there. They're pretty much stagnant, right? So there's no sense in trying to
I think it's
maneuver
important
through
to
those.
note that the proposed budget takes care of our employees in terms of healthcare and benefits. And it most importantly takes care of our infrastructure into the future. I mean, our main streetscape, which, has this interest accruing because of the bond and associated with the main streetscape, is going to take our main street into the next 30 years. It's moving our village into the future. And the forecast that you speak of is creating infrastructure in the Winding Brook neighborhood and throughout our village. It's the cornerstone of our.
It's not fluffy.
It's not fluff.
And don't get the message wrong. We're not in a
yeah.
bad position, right? There's a lot of things that we described earlier in this meeting that are contributing to some of the elevated costs this year and the gaps
Right.
between revenue, fund balance, and expense load.
But I think when we are speaking to our constituents, we're talking about taking care of our employees in this budget, but also carrying our infrastructure into the future. And
correct.
that's essentially what the increased costs associated with this budget
is.
are connected to.
It is. We could be heroes. You could be heroes right now and just stop doing capital work or reduce it drastically. This goes away. And it goes away for good. the work's not gonna go away, but can you get through your 2 or 3 years on the board and worry about it and kick it down the road? Sure, sure. I will tell you that's what's been kind of over decades and decades, not having proper planning where you can appropriate money to do certain work and have a consistent basis and a tax revenue for it is challenging.
Yeah. I think that our
But capital's
residents.
so expensive.
I think our residents appreciate, obviously, the transparency around how this budget is prepared, how it's presented. I mean, there's thorough and there's a lot in here, but it's an easy budget
Yeah.
to at least follow and understand, and it's done by design that way so that it can be followed. I think our residents prefer that rather than the smoke and mirrors that, I would imagine that some municipalities take advantage of to try to create perhaps a different message that isn't necessarily aligned with the actual numbers, if you will.
No one likes taxes, but when you can push it to and relate to a performance plan that shows bang for the buck, shows the investment, shows the comprehensive thinking that the board's putting on this and where the future of this community is going, showing significant improvement, not just sitting there saying, gee, things are getting expensive, so you know what, let's just stop doing stuff and let ourselves just kind of, fall to the wayside. You're a premier community. You've built it that way for a reason. It's by design. It's by design by your policies, by design by your operating costs, by design by your budget, which influences what this place looks and feels like every single day. And quite frankly, the investment that's done, while at a cost, has completely been the catalyst in which why you see Fairport is what it is today and why people want to be here and fighting over real property the moment it comes on the market. It's exactly why that's happening, right?
If between now and when our New York State budget is approved and there is some sort of like
We'll make the change.
hallelujah moment that comes down and,
Money falling from
From the
heaven,
sky.
pennies from heaven.
right, we will have time to react before we,
Yep, this doesn't
We-
have to be adopted
okay.
technically
Okay.
until May 1. I think we
Okay.
have an adoption date now of April 22nd-ish, right?
Tw-
It could be
maybe
anytime.
the
You guys can call a
28th.
meeting at midnight
22nd,
and we-
on
28th.
April 30th to
New York
adopt this if you
State-
wanted
the
to.
New York State budget should be adopted by, what are we, what
May
what is it?
1st.
May 1st.
Should be.
Oh, New York
Oh,
State
April
is
1st.
April 1st.
Well,
Ours is
it's
May
supposed to be
1st.
adopted already. It goes into effect April 1. They're just not there yet.
Okay. So we will not be
And I don't see much
adopting
there either
this
because
bud-
they have multi-billion-dollar deficits. Well, they do. So,
So are you okay if I ask a question about something other than where we've been? You met this morning with the Fairport Municipal Commission, and while I would have liked to have been there, I could not. Did anything significant come from those conversations this morning? Did they have any questions that this board may find of interest that came up during that discussion?
no, we went through the electric budget with them in a little more detail than what we went with our presentation, just really talking about kind of what's going on with that budget, why revenues, and the budget really is up 7%. Most of it's due to kilowatt-hour charges, purchase power adjustments, which are mandates and transmission and delivery costs associated with the electric industry. And in addition to, we had a rate increase that went into effect a little over 6%, that went into effect in December. And then in next December, December 25, there'll be another approximately 2% increase going in there. And that's just covering the true cost of fringe benefits and labor costs that happen from year to year. Payroll, FICA, workers' comp, Social Security, all those other types of things, healthcare costs. But they're dealing with the same thing. A big part of their budget this year was debt. They have debt associated with FMC too, which directly correlates to the village's debt. It's all village debt, right? So when we're doing our borrowing, they did a piggyback borrowing on ours as well, just for different projects associated with the AMI meters that are being installed currently and also the substation work. So it's
Right.
not just borrowing $1.5 million. They borrowed $2 million as well.
When you speak of this 6% rate increase, that's a 6% rate increase on the contractual amount and the supplemental amount. It's on all
Per
of it.
kilowatt hour charge, which all boils down
It's
to a kilowatt hour charge.
It's a baseline increase on both
It is a
rates.
baseline increase on the kilowatt hour charge. That's correct.
Okay.
Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah, on the contractual rate and the supplemental rate, because there's two different rates.
Well, no, the rate increase is only on the kilowatt hour charge. Anytime we go out for supplemental power, should we excise that, right? First of all, we know that 2 years in advance because we hedge it in advance, right? Based on a significant analysis that's done through the MUA and NIMPA. But we'll know what those are and we'll build those into the budgets, and those will be actually built into the rate as well if we think we're going to have it. Because when we buy supplemental, we're saying at least we're going to hedge for 80% of our true liability. Because sometimes it doesn't materialize due to a light winter or not a very cold winter. So we don't want to overhedge at a higher rate than we need. However, you don't want to be too far off that number, because instead of buying it at 6 or 7 cents a kilowatt hour, you could be buying it at 40 cents a kilowatt hour when it's minus 10 for 10 days, right? So it's a gamble. Most of the time we win.
I had a
Sometimes
weird
you lose.
question. I was actually talking to Trustee Briggs about this. Are individual Fairport Electric customers allotted a certain amount, like by individual consumer, at the contractual rate versus the supplemental rate?
No.
How is that?
No, we look at it from the whole franchise.
Oh, okay. So.
Otherwise, I'd hook you up.
So Trustee Mishler could be consuming a lot of power at the supplemental rate or at the contractual rate and getting a really
We
good
look at our
deal.
full franchise, our total load. We look at what our liabilities
There's no
are based
limit?
on. We have a limit on how much hydro we get.
But like from an individual consumer's
No.
is like if
someone's running a
I have
greenhouse
this
at
like
their house.
high powered whatever that I'm trying to run and I am just taking all the juice out of Fairport. I can take as much at the contracted rate as I want.
At the hedged rates, yes, we look at full franchise, what we believe our normalization or what our weather patterns are going to be, and we buy power to meet that anticipated load. There are certain industrial customers that have contracts with the Power Authority that get an industrial rate in excess power, but that's like a one-off or like a Ledestri or something like that.
However,
Which
if
is a
there's
completely
someone who's
different
running a
animal than
business
this.
from a residential location, they
Yep.
can monitor the usage, and it's apparent, and they will have possibly.
Anyone that's trying to abuse preference power rates, preference power is hydropower, associated with things like mining or,
Right.
what do you call it?
Bitcoin mining.
Bitcoin mining. That's not permitted. We know who those folks are. And so how that works is we have a tariff that doesn't allow them to. Otherwise, everybody would just Bitcoin here, take all your preference power, you'd subsidize all that, then everybody be paying a contractual or hedged rate, which is much higher, right? So what we say is basically, on a given day, we have an allocation of a certain allotment based on how much the hydro plant can produce, right? And we have a percentage of what we get from that it's called a long-term agreement, or LTA, that's been in existence since 1901. What we'll do is saying, I know that you have that. So say if today we have just say 10 megawatts that are available to us, and throughout the entire day at 11:59 and 59 seconds, we only use 9.4 megawatts, then we'll let that other person, so say they needed 2 megawatts, which is over the 10 megawatts that we had, whatever remainder of preference power we have, we'll let them have that at the 4 cents because it's ours, and you guys didn't have to subsidize that. It was left over, and then anything else is on the higher rates that we're using associated with like purchase power
So
or
as
contractual
long
power.
as the usage of our community stays within that amount that we're allotted. That
Which is
what you're
generally the
saying?
case outside of the
Which
winter.
is generally a case. And if it does not, then they're charged a tariff?
No, a tariff is your code, your laws, your regulations on how you operate. They're called tariffs or reliefs.
So so I guess I still don't understand. What happens to the consumer who overuses the?
They buy it at market rate, whatever that is.
Is it daily or?
It's a daily rate. Unless we have hedged power for so many kilowatt hours in a year at a preference power rate. Right now, we're not hedged on anything, right? But should we have hedges, they will pay at that rate up to a certain amount. And then anything after that, you're on market rates all the time. So whatever the power is per day, that's what it is.
Does the public have access to this information to see how often this is happening? Like, I'm just curious, because people are concerned about it.
Concerned about what? about having
The abuse,
subsidized.
the abuse of the power, the hydropower.
It's not happening. Yeah. To answer your question, is the information there? I guess we can share load factor on a daily or monthly basis somebody wants to do, but what are they measuring it to? I mean, I don't think they have access to, this is a bigger conversation where
I
it
mean,
comes. No, it's okay. It's a bigger conversation where where we buy power from.
From a board, I think it's important that we protect the consumer.
They are.
Right?
They are.
They are.
Okay.
Fairport
I'm
no,
not saying
Fairport
that they're
Municipal
not, I just
Commission.
want to be,
They are.
And Fairport Electric, they have a whole procedure for this.
There's no one out there taking advantage of our preference power at the expense of you and your residential or commercial rate. It's not happening.
Thank you for sharing that
good
they
to
had
hear.
And that's
no
why we're so big
significant
on
questions.
energy efficiency funds. People that have electric heat use a lot of your power. They're allowed to have electric heat. So we're investing in energy efficiency products because the more efficient we become, it means more kilowatt hours you have to utilize in your home, right? Sometimes you don't always see the benefit of that because every day we become more reliant on electricity. There's one more gizmo that we've incorporated in our life that requires a plug. So that's happening. But I mean, if everybody here had an EV car today, you'd be buying supplemental power all day, right? Say goodbye to your 5-cent power.
because you'd be automatically going into that supplemental.
Yeah, I mean,
rate.
if everybody's charging at night and you have, we have roughly 50,000 people that are get power from us, and it comes from a little over 18,000 meters or 18,000 true customers or bills, because, people have families, so it gets to that 50,000 threshold. But if you have 18,000 at least cars charging every night, you're going to have demand issues, peak issues. Everyone's trying to do that.
Thanks. I didn't mean to go down a
No,
rabbit
it's
hole of
okay.
Fairport Electric. It just was.
So what do we
Came
have
up
left to,
conversation.
I'm going to play the role of moving this meeting along. So what do we have left to cover before we're complete for this evening?
It's whatever you guys want to talk about. Capital work, certain spending patterns that you see in there that you want to discuss.
I'm going to look this way first, and I'm going to ask this side, was there anything left to discuss? I'm seeing nothing from this side.
Yeah, just as the years go on, let's keep in touch, as we're looking at those next other fiscal years. Like you're saying, some of the things are, obviously they're getting more expensive with the garage, and make sure that we're able to compensate the folks who work hard here well. Let's just keep having that conversation.
But things like, parking lots, they all need to be repaved. We're looking for some more money over there. If we don't find that, we still have a duty to take care of Village Landing parking lot.
Right.
We're going to come back, and it's going to be a cash insertion into the capital projects fund. Main Street's going to need repaved again. It will probably be a $600,000, $700,000 or $800,000 project. I mean, the quote we got, which I think is a little high, was $800,000 to pave Main Street as part of the streetscape project. That was pulled from that cost estimate in the bid documents, right? Because we just couldn't afford to include that in there. But these are things that if we're going to have them, they're big numbers. We'll put them in the capital plan because they're far out, but the capital plan can support those big infusions without having some type of grant or other assistance.
In terms of fee schedules and the revenue being generated, where are we at with meetings with Fairport Partnership and Merchant?
We have a meeting this week.
Okay. Obviously, you'll keep us
Yeah,
up to date on.
I will.
Okay. And who will be attending that meeting?
I think just Nancy and I are meeting. I mean, I'm not sure what's really going to materialize out of that. We're asking you to document your plan. I'm not sure what really the purpose of it even is, but that's what we're doing. And she wants to meet. We're going to meet. I'm not sure what's going to come out from a monetary standpoint. It's up to you guys whether you want to allocate costs of service. Outside of that, we're going to use the application to document the process so you guys have something to look at and review and understand the events as they come in, right, as part of your application
I
process.
think that's the most important first step is getting these applications created, out there, standardized, and then we can start to look at where are there gaps between what people are asking for and what they end up actually getting. And then we're going to have to come back and discuss, like, how do we want to manage this? How do we want to handle this? Because it's, to a certain extent, becoming untenable from, as you can see how tight the budget is right now.
And this budget does not include any revenues associated with special events or anything. It doesn't include any cost increases for that. It doesn't include any fees associated with running special events. We're still operating today as we operate.
And I think we also, I mean, the board also received,
You want to do
know,
something great, but yeah.
a nice email from Gabe, owner of Junction, and right, he's with the Merchants Association, just expressing that he very much values the procedure being put in place, so that there's transparency and good communication. So,
So do you want to make the adjustments to that chart based on the money that can be removed from the budget for, I'm sorry, we were talking about technology, just to get a final look at where we stand, and then if there's nothing else that we need to cover this evening, we can start to move towards wrapping this particular meeting up. And then we still have the opportunity next Monday. We will have the hearing, but we still have an opportunity if we wish to discuss further any additional changes. Are you guys okay with that down here? Are you okay down here? Okay.
What you're looking at, this is we've used this before in the past. It's a dashboard that it tells you in real time what's going on. This is right here is exactly the numbers associated with what you're doing, right? This is the proposal you have before you, okay? Everything that, your tax levy, your rate, whatever. When we make an adjustment to either expense or revenue, this is showing a negative 10,000. This shows that because we do that, you reduce the expense load. So instead of having a tax levy of 10.54% or trying to levy, right, 341,000, you now have a 10.23% levy increase, or 331,000, which is a reduction of $10,000, right? Which is what you guys said you wanted to do. So in real time, you see what's going on, and then the rate went to 11.67% versus 11.98% increase. Okay. So if you made a $500 adjustment, you can tell in real time what's happening with this budget. You can appropriate fund balance. I mean, what were the other ones that you guys had did somebody else make a recommendation for something to remove? Oh, the interest. Did you guys want to do with anything with interest? No? She would call me later and cry, so I probably wouldn't do it, but.
what about mortgage
Why
tax?
did you let that happen?
If
What?
we adjusted the mortgage tax, a couple thousand. Nope. Mike's like, nope.
There's
Yeah.
no,
That's the problem, is
at
the
this week's
supply.
meeting,
Not a good
in the
prediction.
town of Perrington, there are 7, so that's
Right.
including the Village of Fairport. This week, or last, couple days ago, there were 7 houses on the market.
So when you look at house sales, we looked at this. People sell in April. That's the premier time to do it. There's nothing for sale in the village, really, right? This is when everyone sells for the year prior to school getting out. There's really not much there. Interest rates are still sitting at the 6% rate. And we talked about this in the budget message. It comes down to one thing: supply. People with money will still make crazy decisions and buy houses with crazy interest. They don't care. The supply is just not there, right? And we talk about
And-
supply
and
here. We have
from-
2,200 units in the Village of Fairport. It's nothing. It's
The
nothing.
person who sat at this meeting, who works in real estate, said, unless you know where you're moving to, do not sell your house. That was the comment that was made to the people in the room, because there are so few, and even if you get a great rate for your house, you're going to pay a lot of money for wherever you want to move to. So if you like where you live you're probably better off just staying where you are at this point in time. It's not going to equate to a lot of house sales.
I just asked, is there anything else of adjustment you guys were thinking about? Okay.
I don't think so.
Is there anything that you got, I mean, I don't care how crazy, is there anything out there you're thinking about that you want us to look into or review for merit,
We
feasibility? We have the time, right?
we
have a
had
month.
talked about, I
look
had a
at something.
conversation with one of the trustees who said they would like to at least find out more information if we started charging for parking in the underground ramp garage. I will leave them nameless. That way nobody can get attacked for even having the thought. But can you just explore that idea, a small amount, just to give us an idea? It may not be something that we would even think is feasible this year, but maybe next year.
I mean, yeah, if you have 100 spots, I mean, it's a quick math issue. So, I mean, if you were charging $500 a year on 100 spots, you're talking about $50,000.
Is there a contract, like, or is there some sort of negotiation that took place with the residents in above the creamery that we would need to
I won't say too
honor?
much here, but what I will say is the planning board doesn't have to have the right to give away public property or subsidize projects like that. That comes the authority from you. What is said in those site plans, what has been executed or promised, I don't know how valid it is. I don't know how much you want to go down that road. And
Would
give it up and
require
change
some
that,
further
but
exploration.
You have the authority to dictate what happens with the project, not a planning board saying, oh yeah, take that road, you can use it for your own goods. That's not how it works, right? And I'll leave it at that. This is a long time ago. Is it really worth ruffling the feathers? I don't know, and I don't really know what the impacts are. We're talking about 3 cars here.
Do we
Who
know,
knows?
on a totally different topic, do we know where the county is at with composting? Is this something that could go with a shared service? We don't.
I don't know that it's moved forward any at this time.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think they're still doing surveys, it'll take them a while to process.
You know, we've been doing that whole shared county services contracts and stuff from the state forever. The big one that we took advantage of was the consolidation and merging of the town and village court, which happened
Which was a
3 years
nice-
now,
Yeah.
3 years ago or something now.
2 or 3 years ago.
That was a long time coming. And again, that was
But
something where
there's nothing
we can
on the
reduce the expense level,
horizon
but the
right
service
now.
level to the resident stayed the same, right? You're just not going here, you're going a mile away to the town. So that was a good move on the village's part to do that.
The boater bathrooms.
Mm-hmm.
At one point in the back room, there was washer and dryers.
I think there still is, isn't there, Jay? Yeah,
Who has access to them?
the boaters.
They don't know that.
They use them every day in summer.
So right now, there are washers and dryers that boaters can use.
Yep, showers, everything.
Huh.
Yep, and we cleaned that up, replaced a bunch of stuff, painted it and a bunch of things, what, a year or 2 ago. Yep. You know, that's another one. I mean, that's a contract. That's $4,500 a year, just to have boaters' bathrooms exclusive for boaters. You know, their rates don't cover things like that. You know, it's a very expensive commodity to have an exclusive, and I'm glad they have it, right? I mean, that's what makes it so desirous. But when you're talking about, you know, significant investments to the mooring facilities, which we've been making, and they look great, and we're continuing to do those. Boaters' restrooms contracts, because we don't own that building. That building is owned by the developer at $5,000. The maintenance and costs associated with doing that, the water and electric associated with doing that, water and electric at the mooring facilities on the docks, boat stanchion repairs, lighting, water pump stations, water services. There's a lot there. So when people talk about, oh, you increased your rates, I'm charging you $11 or $13 a day on the average for your boat size for what we're talking about. It's a good service, right? It's a really, really good service, and I'm glad we have it. But it's an expensive commodity when you're talking about having marina facilities, right? And we made adjustments over the years. Don't get me wrong. I mean, It used to be drastically low. People would just park there forever because it was essentially free to park there. So we've made a number of adjustments over the years. But, I just think, like every year, those costs go up. We should just have like a normal rotating, it goes up 3% a year or something like that, just on a rotating basis to keep up with the costs associated with managing those facilities. No. Oh, it very much is. You can go anywhere and have a marina. No place you get to have a marina, and you're right in the downtown commercial corridor. I get off my boat, grab my flip-flops, I'm at a bar and having a restaurant in 2 seconds, right? That's what you're paying for. The environment you've created that makes it so desirous to park, or you can park anywhere, but they park here for a reason. So. Well, feel free to continue to call us, email us, let us know what you want us to look into, talk about. If you have questions, more than happy to meet with you independently, whatever you'd like. We have the time to do it, right? Don't rush this. If we don't need a meet on Monday because there's nothing really there, but you want to investigate or explore something, let's do that.
Well,
More
we
than happy
still
do that.
have to have a public hearing.
Yep, that's right.
So we have to meet on
Correct.
Monday. Tuesday is an optional meeting at 5:30 on April 1st. And should we decide on Monday, the 31st, that there's nothing left to discuss, we can get rid of that Tuesday meeting. Okay. Any last comments? I will ask for, thank you, Megan. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Jason, for being here to share information with us. We really appreciate it. Ryan, how many people are online tonight? 3. Whoever you, Ryan, one is Ryan. Hi, Ryan. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, 2, because one of them's him.
Yeah. So 2 people, for the other 2 people who are watching tonight, thank you
Good.
very much. And I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn our meeting this evening.
So moved.
By trustee Mishler,
Second.
by trustee Wojka. It's 7:58. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? That will be unanimous. Have a great evening. Thank you all for your work. It's very, very important. And we'll see you all back on Monday. You'll